Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for taking the time out today to join this webinar. I'm going to be taking you through our long-term conditions management solution today, and hopefully the webinar should give you a good insight into how the process works and how it can be implemented into your practice. But of course, we're always happy to arrange further training at your practice if needed, so please do send over a request just via our support desk website to arrange this. So as a bit of background to the system, traditionally many practices we found will have a fairly manual recall system in place. So where, for example, patients with multiple conditions will have separate recall in their record for each condition and then be called into the practice for separate reviews. Now, the aim with the Ardens LTC process is that a patient's invited and comes into the practice just once, even if they have multiple separate conditions. The process works not by looking at the traditional recall dates in the records, but instead we use a series of clinical reports which flags the patient for an annual review for all of their conditions based on their month of birth as an effective way of splitting that work out evenly throughout the year. Now, as a very quick overview, quick introduction, I'm just going to take you through a few of the tabs on the main template that controls the whole system. That's just before we get to our agenda, which I'll come back onto just in a few minutes' time. Now I'm just going to flick into System 1. I'm logged into System 1 here. I've got a test patient open. And the main long-term condition review template is the second icon in that appears underneath the patient's name. That's the one next to your general consultation doctor's bag. Now, if I click on this, you'll notice along the top, I've got a tab for really each step of the way. Starting with the invitations tab, this gives me an effective summary for the month of birth that the patient is going to be invited in. As I say, that defaults to the patient's month of birth, but you can override that, which I'll come on to a little bit later. It shows me when their last annual review was and any invitations that have been sent to the patient. We then have a bookings tab, which your reception team can use, and that should give them all the information they need to make that informed decision about which clinician is the best clinician to book this patient in with. I can see what tests are required. I've got some general advice here as to how long that appointment should be, and a summary of the conditions that they've got. There's an initial review and tests tab, so when the patient comes in for their blood tests, I've really got a comprehensive summary of everything that needs to be done for that patient, including the blood tests that are required, any other tests, and a real-time work to-do list, which just acts as a checklist of everything that I should be recording for this annual review. And then finally, a review tab where the full annual review can be done, as well as the medication review, and I can tick a box down here to say that the annual review is completed, which takes the patient off any further invitation lists. Now, there's a series of conditions that is covered by the long-term condition review. So the first item on our agenda here is just to show you where you can find that information as to what conditions are actually covered. Now, we've linked up the items on the agenda here on the webinar page to take you to the relevant support article. I'm just going to click on conditions covered, which takes you to an overview article for this whole process. There's a couple of other demonstration videos that you can have a look at if you wish. But scrolling down underneath there, there's a summary of the conditions that are included. So as you can see here, it covers all the conditions for QOF, but also a series of other conditions. So it really is quite a comprehensive annual long-term condition review that covers all conditions, not just what's required for QOF. There's also just underneath a summary of the pre-appointment tests that are going to be advised depending on the conditions and the medication that the patient's taken. There's a hyperlink to this. If you click that link, it'll open up an Excel spreadsheet where you can really see exactly what order sets are going to be advised depending on the conditions. And that's all just based on best practice guidance. Now I'm just going to jump back onto our agenda page here. And the next item on our agenda is setting up the LTC reviews. So there's a few settings that you just need to tweak in order to get going with this. I'm going to click on this link, and that takes you to another support article here with some step-by-step guidance on what to do for the setup. Now, one of the first steps is to really select whether you want to run with a one-stop, a two-stop, or a three-stop clinic. All this really is relating to is the advice for the length of the appointment that is on the template. Now, if I just flick back into System 1 here, just open that template again. On the Bookings tab, you can see here that I'm being advised to book a general review for 10 minutes based on the conditions that the patient's got. Now, that can work in a few different ways. You can have a separate respiratory review advised or a separate cardiovascular review advised as well, depending on whether you elect a one-stop, two-stop, or a three-stop clinic. Now, in the Setup menu at the top of the very top of System 1, if you go to Data Output and Patient Status Alerts, that's where you can make this choice. You can see on the tree on the left-hand side, I've got Arden's LTC one-stop, two-stop, and three-stop clinic. Now, by default, all of these options will be switched on. So the first time you look at that template and the Bookings tab, you may well see some duplication on there, and that's just because we haven't completed this part of the setup. The one-stop clinic will either give you advice for booking a 10, 20, 30, or 40-minute general review, depending on the number of conditions that the patient has. The two-stop clinic will split the respiratory review. So if the patient has any respiratory conditions, they'll have a 20-minute respiratory review, and then a separate general review for either 10, 20, or 30 minutes, depending on the number of other conditions that the patient has as well. And the three-stop clinic there just splits it down one level further, where you have a separate cardiovascular review. So in the scenario where your patient has respiratory conditions, cardiovascular conditions, and other conditions, you may well have the advice saying to book a respiratory review for 20 minutes, a cardiovascular review for 10 or 20 minutes, and a further general review for 20 or 30 minutes. Now, all you need to do once you've made that decision is just to deactivate the options that you're not going to be using. So in our case, we've elected to go for a one-stop clinic. And you can see here that the boxes under the enabled column are ticked. If I go to two or three-stop clinic, you can see that we've disabled those. So it's just as simple as unticking the boxes of the options that you're not going to be using. There's a little bit more information on this on the support article there for setup. Just drills down into a little bit more information. The other thing to consider is to set your slot types and your rotas to mirror your appointments that you're going to be offering. That's really just if you want to make those long-term condition review appointments available to be booked through System Online. If you haven't opened up your System Online to your nursing appointments and long-term condition reviews, you don't really need to worry too much about that step. But obviously, if you are opening up your appointments online, you need to match really the advice on the template to what you've got available in your appointment lists. The next part of the setup is really we advise to use something in System 1 called Free Slot Search Presets. You may well be using the Free Slot Search already on your appointment screen. System 1 introduced a while ago now the ability to preset that information. We'll see that a little bit more when we come on to booking the appointments, but there's some step-by-step guides there on how you can create those. And then the final step for the setup is to just double check the read codes that we're using for the long-term condition reviews against anything else that you might be using those codes for. Essentially, those three codes that are on the screen at the moment are the codes that works out whether the patient has had a recent long-term condition review. So obviously, if you're using those codes for any other reason, it may then mean that a particular patient that's already got that code in the record may not be brought up for an annual long-term condition review because the system thinks that they've already had one. Now, there's a simple check for this in System 1, so I'm just going to flick back into the system. Up at the top of the screen, if you open your reporting menu and then select Clinical Reporting, here you'll find your Arden's folder. I've got that expanded already. And you see you have LTC Review folder, and then you just need to click to expand that. If you select the Setup category then, there's a simple report that just runs to see whether those codes are in any of your patient records already. Ideally, what we're looking for there, in order to get going with the system straight away, is if you run that report, we're ideally looking for 0 patients being found. If you do find one or two patients, just a case of looking in the record and identifying what that code might have been put in there for, and perhaps swapping that code for something else. If you do get lots of patients that are returned in that report, just let us know and we can further advise you on how you can iron that problem out just before getting going with the system. I'm just going to go back to our agenda. So we've had a quick look at setting up or various settings involved. So the next item on the agenda is to look at how to send the invitations and the reminders. Now, if I dip back into System 1, you'll find all of the invitation reports in the same clinical reporting folder here. So just to recap, I've just gone to Reporting, Clinical Reporting. I've opened the Ardens folder and then opened LTC Review. And we'll start with for first invitations. So in that folder, you'll see you've got lots of invitation reports all arranged nice and easily just by the various months of birth. So I'm just scrolling down the page here, and I'm just going to find the first invitations to send in August for September birthdays, or the patient's chosen month. Now, the reports are then broken down further by available contact method, really. So if any of your patients have got email consent and an email address recorded in the record, they'll appear in the email group. If they don't have email consent, but they do have a mobile number and text message consent, they'll appear in the SMS group. And if they have neither of those consents, they'll then appear in the post group. You've, of course, always got a group for all patients. So if you prefer to send a letter to patients, regardless of whether they have consent for emails or text messages, you can use the all group. And actually, we would advise sending a letter, certainly for the first invite, because the letter can be a lot more detailed than the email or the text message. You've got a lot more available merge fields that you can use for the letter that you'd send. Now, for any of those groups that you want to send the invitation to, all you need to do here is just run that report. Of course, you can click on Show Patients if you want to have a look through those records just before sending the invites, or just seeing who's going to be flagged for an invite for that month. And then you just use the built-in bulk actions at the bottom of that right-click menu in order to send the letter. You've got print integrated word letters here, which I'd select. You've also got send SMS message or send email. We've got some preset email and SMS message text that you could copy and use those, or certainly use those as a starting point, but of course you can send anything that you want to. Now, as a second stage for once you've sent the invitations, so here, if I'm sending a letter to everybody, I would just right-click Actions, I'd send print integrated word letters, and then select the letter that I wanted to send the patients. We've got a version of that letter that you're more than welcome to use, or in case, of course, you can go in there, copy it, adapt it, and just create one locally for your surgery. But the second process that I need to do after printing the letters and sending the letters out is to then add the read code that's in the actual description of the report. So here it says add read code XABEF. And what that's for is just to tell the report that the first communication or first invitation has gone out to those patients, in which case they'll move off of that list and then they'll appear on the second invitations group for that second invitation to be sent after a month or so. Now I'm just going to go into my patient record here. I've still got open. I'm just going to go back into the long-term condition review template and just show you the invitations tab again. Once obviously all of those letters have been sent to the patients, any patient that you go into and come onto this tab, you'll see an effective overview of the previous invitations that have already been sent. And this is just quite a nice way of opening up a letter just to show you how our default letter looks. But of course you can go through and make any changes that you want to. So here, this is an invitation letter that my test patient has been sent on the 2nd of August. I'm just going to right click and it's going to say view content to bring that up. So this is what our letter looks like. So it merges in all the patient's demographic details. It then says your annual review is now due for your, and lists the conditions that this patient's got. So in my test patient's case, they have hypertension and asthma. And it then gives the advice on the appointments that they're going to need to book. There's then some instructions on how to book that, so whether they want to book it directly on the phone. And we've also put some instructions on there as to what the URL is that they need to go to if they want to book that appointment online, if they're registered for system online. Again, if you haven't opened up your long-term condition review appointments to be able to be booked online, that may just be something to consider and a tweak to the letter that you might want to make. There's also some other text down here saying that we may need to do some blood tests, and a line here saying, please remember to bring your inhalers too if they have a respiratory condition. I'm just going to come out of that letter now. Now, the other options that you've got around the invitations on the template are that you've got a button here for Choose LTC Review Month. Now, that's really useful if you get the scenario maybe where a husband and a wife want to come in and want to have their annual reviews at the same time, but obviously born in different months, and you want to override the review month for a particular patient. If I click on that button, you then just get the option here to select another month. So let's say the patient wants to come in April instead of August in this patient's case. And then you confirm it with the month chosen tick box down at the bottom. So it's the presence of both of those codes together that overrides that choice. Automatically then, the patient just shuffles into the relevant invitation report month, and you can just continue as normal. You can, from the template, send individual letters, although we'd advise sending that in bulk from the invitation reports that we looked at. But you can send an individual letter from the template. And the final thing really to mention is the red area down at the bottom with the tick box, declined invitation and review. So if a patient doesn't want to have their long-term condition review, they decline it. Ticking that box will prevent the patient from being sent any further invites. And we do need to remember we still need to go into the record and put the relevant exception codes on there for the QOF purposes, but really that tick box is to prevent the patient from getting a further invitation. So back to our agenda, just a note now on sending the LTC reminders. I've touched on it already just in that previous section there, but just dipping back into System 1 and the clinical reports, once we've sent those invitations and we've added the read code there to say that the invitation's been sent, the patients will then all move on to the second invitations group. Now, at the moment, the description of that search is second invitations to send, first invite sent more than 2 months ago. We had some feedback from practices that have already implemented this, and the general feedback that we're getting is that practices would prefer that to be a month. So that's a change that we're going to be making at the end of this week, so that patients pop up on that list once it's been more than 1 month since they've had their first invitation. But of course, they haven't had their review yet. Once I've sent those second invitations, I then add the read code that's in the description of the search. So again, another bulk adding of the read code, which is just done by right-click Actions and Add Read Code. And then I just search for this code. And that just tells the report that the second invitation's been sent and moves the patient onto the third invitations. And again, we're changing that time frame at the end of the week to being third invitations to send, where the second invite has been sent more than 1 month ago, not 2 months ago. And just the last thing just to mention around the invitations process really is for care home and housebound patients group. So patients that are coded as being a care home resident or housebound aren't picked up in these normal first, second and third invitations group. The thinking behind that is that you'd much rather do all care home residents in one particular month rather than visiting every single month. So the trick there really is just to make sure that all of your care home and housebound registers are all up to date and the patients are all adequately coded. Again, there's a little bit of more information on that on our website, on our support articles, but you have got some registers down here that you can make use of for care homes, just to make sure that all of the patients that you have registered in a care home are being picked up on a register. I've just had a question through from Sonia just through on the chat here, saying, does the decline only last for the 12 months? So yeah, absolutely. I think this is just relating to, on the invitations tab, the tick box down at the bottom say declined invitation and review. The patient would then get at least a first invitation the next year, and it would be up to them to inform the practice that they wanted to decline again. So patient, that tick box there doesn't opt the patient out from long-term condition reviews indefinitely. It's just purely for this year. Good, so just dipping back onto our agenda here. So we've looked at sending the invitations and the reminders. So the next stage here is for booking the long-term condition appointments. Now this is all controlled with the template in the patient's record. So I'm just going to open my patient record here. If the patient's on the phone wanting to book their appointment, the process would really be that the receptionist would retrieve that patient record first and therefore be able to access the long-term condition review template. From here, I then just select the Bookings tab, and this then gives me an effective overview of all the information I should need to go and book that appointment in with the right person. You can see my patient needs an asthma questionnaire. They do require blood tests and a urine ACR. We're saying a 10-minute appointment here, which is just based on the options that we've chosen for this particular practice. And the conditions that the patient has is asthma and hypertension. In order to go and book the appointment, on the right-hand side, you've got all the relevant options that you'll need. Now, you've got a link here to your just your normal appointment ledger. So if you prefer to go through and just search for an available appointment with an HCA or a nurse, just using the appointment ledger, you can link to it there. What we would advise certainly is to use the free slot search presets. That's something that I touched upon when we talked about the setup options, but it's a really easy way of pinpointing and identifying the next available appointment given a particular criteria. If I click on free slots presets here, here I've set up a few where you can basically see how this works. I've set up some presets here for long-term condition initial appointment, 20, 30, 40 minutes. You can name these whatever you want to do. And actually when you double click on them, it will take you to a pre-configured free slot search, just purely identifying the next available appointment given a search criteria. Unfortunately, this next stage isn't something that I'm able to access, just because that will bring up people's names that work for this organisation. So I'm going to cancel out of it at this point. But of course, there is some more information on our website as to how to effectively set those up. I've just brought my agenda back up there, and I'm just going to click on the Setting Up LTC Reviews link again, just to highlight where that information is. As I scroll down, the advice for the setup, just to recap, you've got some information down here for setting up the free slot search presets. Now the other options, just on the right-hand side, you've got a link to patient contact details if you needed to update any telephone numbers or anything for the patient receiving a text message later on about the outcome of their long-term condition review. A good opportunity to check there as well. And you've also got the same tick box that we had on the invitations tab. That's just another opportunity to drop in the code for declined invitation and review if you wanted to opt the patient out for that year. So that's booking the appointments. The next stage to look at is then performing the LCC tests. So in my example patient here, we saw when booking the appointment that the patient did require blood tests and a urine ACR. So the patient's then booked in with an HCA. The HCA would open the long-term condition review template and then just select the initial review and tests. Obviously, the patient would have an appointment just booked into a normal rota, so you just open that patient record just as normal with a right-click in Consultation, and then just click on, after clicking on the Start Consultation button, you would then just click on the long-term condition review icon underneath the name and address, and select the Initial Review and Tests tab. So this just really serves as a comprehensive checklist of everything that needs to be recorded for that patient. So I can see some previous well-being information. A patient's a smoker in this case, a summary of the conditions that they have, I then have a list of all of the blood tests that are outstanding and that are required, any other tests. So in this case, the patient requires a urine ACR, and then my real-time work to-do list. So as I start to record this information, this acts as a checklist, and the work to do will shrink. It'll disappear off of the list once you've done the associated action. So if we go through the links on the right-hand side then and start recording a little bit of this information, every patient really annually should have a well-being review. So I've always got a link to that template up at the top. I click on there. I can then start to fill in the template and just record all of that data. Now moving this window out of the way here, I can still sort of get back to some of the work to do here. So for the well-being information, I can see this patient needs a BMI, a smoking status, or a smoking advice, sorry, some lifestyle advice and depression screening. So as I start to record that and OK it, we'll see that effectively disappear off the work to do list. So I'll go through and pop some values in here. So for a weight, so the patient's 11 stone 3. For the height, I'll say 5'10". It calculates the BMI for me. I'm then going to pop on another smoking status and smoking cessation advice code, along with a signposting to smoking cessation service. I'm going to do the mood questions there, and then just a general code there for lifestyle advice on diet, alcohol, smoking, exercise, and weight. Now, when I OK here, you'll see that then the work to do list shrinks, and those options have been dealt with, so they disappear. Now, when it comes then onto the blood tests, I can see my patient requires an HbA1c. They also need lipids, but the U's and E's have been done less than 2 months ago. I've got a link over here to the blood tests template, or the phlebotomy test template. If I open that one up, the little window at the bottom will show me kind of a detailed view of the previous 3 results for everything there, so I can see the exact date that they were last done and what the values were. And I can go through and just record the blood test. So here I would say blood sample's been taken. I might drop in here some text in the test requested, which is quite useful just for reviewing back on the journal. I'm going to double click on an order set here. And then I've got a link at the top to a new electronic pathology request. And that will just launch ICE or TQuest or whatever your preferred electronic pathology requesting package is. I can then see my patient requires a urine ACR. Again, I've got a link to the right template on the right-hand side, so the urine test or the urinalysis template. If I open that one up, hopefully these templates you'll recognise. These are all the same templates that are available in Ardens sort of independently, this long-term condition review process. On this particular one here, it's the ACR sent code that I'm looking for, so I'll just click on that one and OK. Now, the rest of the work to do here, of course, that can all be tackled in the patient's full review. They come back to see one of the nurses or one of the specialist nurses. But the opportunity here is to, with the relevant clinical support in practice, to get the HCAs to be recording a lot more of this information, which would then free up time for the specialist nurses for the full reviews. If a lot of this is recorded by the HCA, the full review can actually then just be a notes review where the medication's reauthorized and the blood tests are reviewed, and the patient can then be contacted whether they're actually required to come back into the practice or not. And the system is designed to be quite flexible, so you don't have to work in that way, and the patient can, of course, just have another appointment booked to see the cardiovascular or the respiratory nurse. But really, that scenario can really improve efficiency. It can be a lot more cost effective, and obviously just save a lot of time for both clinicians and the patient. Now, all of the initial review templates linked on the right-hand side. So my patient's hypertensive and they have asthma, so I've got links into my cardiovascular initial review and my asthma initial review template. The other initial reviews are grayed out here just because my patient doesn't have the associated conditions. So diabetes initial review and COPD initial review are both grayed out. If I go through and do the cardiovascular initial review, I can see my patient requires a blood pressure and a pulse. So here, put the pulse in there and the blood pressure. Click OK. And then that disappears off the work to do list. I can then click on my asthma initial review, and I can do the various bits and pieces on here as well. So here I could do things like the inhaler technique is on there. the 3 RCP questions here. So I can put in there the symptoms. And the ACT score is on there as well, which I could record if I wanted to. I'm just getting a recommended field here for the review code there. I'm not going to put that on just at this moment because the full annual asthma review hasn't been completed yet, just the initial tests. So I don't need to return to the template. And you can see here, it's just all updates on the work to do list. Now, at the bottom of the template on the initial review and tests, you've got another tick box there in the red border, and that's just to say that the initial LTC assessment has been done. So once the HCA is satisfied they've done all that they can do in that, they can just tick that box. And when it comes to the full review, obviously the patient could have an appointment booked for the full review, but actually under the reporting menu and clinical reporting, you have another register of reviews that have been completed in the last month. So here, the idea of this is that this just flags patients that have had their initial reviews done in the last month, and we split them down by the different conditions. So the idea here being that your respiratory nurse could just open these patient records for the asthma reviews and the COPD reviews and perform a notes review and inform the patient whether they need to come back in. In order to do that, I could just open the record, again, click on the long-term condition review template and select the full review. And this works much the same way, where the work to-do list is interactive, just flags everything that needs to be done. There's a little bit more on here, so for things like medication reviews, will appear on the full review tab rather than the initial review and tests, as the medication review wouldn't have been done by the HCA at that point. I can go through and complete any of this. So, for example, here I've got a medication alert, review ACE-ARB, as a patient's on 2 or more. I can click on the drug review in this case, and I can go and deal with that. I can pop on, I've done the medication review, but also just make that decision for which medication the patient could maybe come off of. I'll just say stop that one, end of course, and then click OK. You see again, it's just all reflected on the work to do list. The final thing really, just to consider, is to add on the annual long-term condition review completed code. And that's the one that just flags everything's been done for that patient for the year, and it removes the patient from those work lists, those follow-up reports that I went on to just earlier. And then here you've got a patient follow-up button as well. So to inform the patient whether they need to come back in for a follow-up appointment or not, you can do that all through the template as well. So if I click on LTC follow-up, I've got no follow-up, phone call follow-up, or face-to-face follow-up. And each of these options has got a few presets where you can send a letter or a text message or an email to the patient. In this case, if I click on no follow-up, here I've got some text which I can use just to copy. And then I can click on send email, send text message, send a letter, or I can send a task over to my admin team if I'd like them to follow up with the patient as well. And just the final thing, just very, very quickly, is just to talk about is the exception reporting side. So obviously we've touched upon preventing the patient from being sent any further invites by ticking that declined invitation and review tick box on the template. But you do still need to go into the record and remember to put on the various exception codes for the QOF registers that the patient's on. And in order to do this, I can do this in a number of ways really, but on any of the templates for the conditions, if I go back into the template, the review tab perhaps, and open up the asthma or the cardiovascular review options, there's a red star icon, down a little toolkit icon down in the right-hand side. If I click on that one, it takes me to the contract template for QOF for that register, and I'll find my exception codes towards the bottom of there. The other way of getting into those exception or those contract templates, should I say, is in any records, you can click on Auto Consultation, go to Ardens Contracts, and then here you'll see them listed. So in this case, I can click Asthma, and then just pop on the exception code, which accepts them from the QOF register. Okay, so hopefully it gives you a good flavour for how the whole system fits together and how the process works. Just to mention again, we're more than happy to arrange any additional training sessions to be held at your practice or do any group training sessions for a locality group perhaps. Please just send in a request for our website if you're interested in additional training. Just at the top of our support desk website here, you can see on my screen, there's a link to booking training. And then here, if I scroll down a little bit for practice training, I can click on the book training link, and then you can pop your request into this form, and we'll get back to you very shortly. You should have a chat feature available at the top of your screen, just like a little speech bubble icon. So if you did have any questions, please feel free just to type them into that chat window, and I'll do my best to answer any here. Or alternatively, you can always use the Contact Us form on our website. There's just a contact link at the top of our support desk website. If you drop us a note in there, and we'll get back to you very shortly.